All right, we're going to get started, everybody. Do you have any announcements? No, just be sure to sign in if you need the hours. We've got a sign-in sheet on a clipboard that's going around, so sign in, please. Awesome. Okay, we're going to get started. My name is Barb Clark, and I'm really happy to be here with you guys today. I work at Families Rising, like my boss did our opening keynote this morning, Lehia Cushman did. I'm the director of training there. And I also am an adoptive foster kinship caregiver like many of you guys. I have 5 young adult children. They are 22, 23, 24, 25, and 25. And listen to this, none of them live with me right now. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that, I know, jazz hands for me. No, they're awesome. And we've had a couple of boomerangers, and I know we'll have some more living with us again at different points, but right now we're empty nesters officially. You can scan the QR code if you want the handouts. You can also email me if the QR code doesn't work well for you, and I can email them to you as well. So it's important to note, though, before I start talking, anytime I'm talking about my children, and this was brought up briefly earlier today, the stories you're going to hear me share are stories I have permission to share, right? There's always a lot of stories that I would love to share that would be really helpful and humorous as well that I don't have permission to share, and so I will not do that because I have to respect my children's right to confidentiality. So Families Rising, we work in the United States and Canada. We also work in Canada. And our mission is to amplify those with lived experience. And I have lived experience as a caregiver, but really when we use that term, we're talking about those who are adopted or in foster or kinship care. We do training, support, advocacy with the families, but also with child welfare professionals. We do have an awesome conference that Lehia mentioned. It is the Best Adoption Foster Care National Conference, right? This is a great state one. But it's October 6th through the 8th in Orlando, and everybody likes coming to Florida, right? For a trip. Lehia and I both live there. I'm a Minnesotan. You'll hear my Minnesota accent, but I moved to Florida 3 years ago. So with that, I'm going to dive into this. Most of the stories you're going to hear me sharing today, and we might need to kind of move into the middle, or unless you want people hopping over you. Most of the stories you'll hear me sharing are about my daughter, Akila. And again, she gives me permission to share these stories. Akila is an awesome young woman. She's 25. She is diagnosed with a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And tomorrow, I think it's the first morning session, Jean Clarkson and myself and Rebecca Toulouse, who is right there, will be doing a training on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders that I highly recommend too. So anyways, one of the things that I like to talk about when I talk about the strategies and how to deal with behaviors is, first of all, we have to talk about why some of the typical strategies don't work great with our kids, right? Most of us were parented with punishments and consequence and logic-based parenting, right? And some of us might have parented children who were neurotypical or biological, or kids that were neurotypical, and those strategies probably worked okay, right? And it worked okay for many of us when we were being brought up, but because of the way that our children's brains were impacted by their trauma, those strategies don't always work great with all of our kids. And so the reasons why they don't always work great is that they can cause further trauma, right? When I do my more in-depth fetal alcohol training, I tell a story of how my husband and I threw away our daughter's blankie when she was 6 to try to teach her to stop stealing, right? And we had already done tons of consequences and social stories and positive behavioral interventions and sticker charts up the wazoo, and none of it was working. So we decided we needed to go hardcore and really find something. And obviously we weren't trauma-informed parents, right? Throwing away your blankie is super embarrassing, but I like to help you guys hear our mistakes so that you maybe don't screw up as much as my husband and I did. And I like to say he did it mostly, but it was me too. But anyways, another family I know in a different state here in the US, about a year ago, their 14-year-old daughter wanted to shave eyebrows in the lines in the eyebrows that's very popular. The parents said no. The daughter still did it. And to punish her, the parents held her down, shaved her eyebrows, and wouldn't let her pencil eyebrows in when she went to school as a punishment. This is happening in today's world. And there's more extreme. People are using physical corporal punishment, right? There's just, when we use those type of strategies, especially with kids with high behaviors, we can get too extreme and start causing the trauma ourselves. And none of us as caregivers want to cause our children trauma. We want to help them heal from trauma, right? Also, you don't feel like a safe adult if all you are doing is punishing a child and coming down on them. It starts to impact their felt safety, right? We talk in child welfare a lot about felt safety. A lot of times a child comes into our home and we know they're safe, but they don't feel safe because of the way that their trauma has impacted their regulatory system. And so if all you are doing is lecturing, yelling, coming down on them, punishing, taking things away, you don't feel safe and like somebody they want to attach and connect to, right? And we know how important that is, even if they're only there temporarily, right? Even if it's a foster care temporary situation, the attachment is still important. But also those type of strategies increase anxiety. And we really need to be mindful of the anxiety that our kids are dealing with. I can remember once when I was a kid and my parents were at work in the summer and I broke something I was not supposed to be touching. And I was a ball of anxiety all day. I'm like, they are going to kill me. Now, my parents were not abusive. We just don't like to disappoint our parents, right? And I was a mess. When our anxiety is high, our learning is low, right? Because when we're anxious, our heart starts to beat faster, which makes our body temperature increase. Our blood sugar increases, our blood pressure increases, our bodies tense up, and our learning goes away, right? You don't learn when you are highly anxious. And so we have to be mindful of that. A lot of those supports do that. So if people will say to me all the time, they'll say, well, yeah, Barb, but these kids need to understand consequences because they're going to face them out there in the world. And I'm like, you are correct. They are going to face consequences out there. But if they don't learn from consequence-based teaching, why do we keep using that as the thing to teach them what to do or not do, right? My favorite quote I share almost every time I train is from a man named Walter Barbie, and it goes, if you've told a child 1,000 times and they still haven't learned, it's not the child who's the slow learner, right? And that's my husband and I. We just kept punishing and punishing and punishing for years and years and years, even though it wasn't helping her to stop some of these hard behaviors, right? And so the other thing that I say to those people is when these kids are facing consequences, whether it's in the school system, the justice system, employment, relationships, family, if they don't have a strong foundational relationship with some healthy adults in their life, those consequences are going to smack them a million times harder, right? We need to have a strong relationship with these kids so that when they are facing these consequences, we're in their court and on their team and can help them. So also I say this too, some of these kids have already experienced some of the most severe consequences imaginable. They're not with their families of origin. That is a loss that they are going to be dealing with their entire life. Now, some of them might be reunified, hopefully, right? But even being gone from their family for a while is a huge consequence. Many of them also have brains that were compromised from their trauma. So they're already facing more consequences than most of us can even imagine. So the more trauma responsive kind of supports that we want to use, right? And a lot of us have heard of TBRI, trust-based relational interventions. That is a phenomenal curriculum and kind of philosophy of how we as adoptive, foster, and kinship caregivers and professionals should be supporting young people that have experienced trauma. These kind of approaches focus first and foremost on relationship. In the TBRI world, they say connection before correction, and that is really important. Also, they don't shame or blame. You guys think about the shame-based things that we say to kids naturally all the time. Act your age. You're acting like a baby. 10-year-olds don't do that. What were you thinking? That my husband still struggles with this. Like one of my 23-year-old was being a ding dong 6 months ago, and we were having to have one of those sit down meetings, like what's your problem kind of thing. Except for that's not what you want to sit down and say, what's your problem? Or why would you do that? When you say, why would you do that? Or what were you thinking to a kid or to anybody, instantly they feel stupid, right? We have to be mindful of the language that we use because it is natural to use this shame-based language with our kids, and it is not fair. And especially for kids that have neurodivergence and have been impacted by trauma. These kind of approaches also understand the neural behavioral aspects of behavior, right? We look at Dr. Mona Delahook is this wonderful psychologist who has written several books. One's called Beyond Behaviors and her other one is Brain Body Parenting. And one of the things in her first book that I'll never forget, she said, and when we look at behaviors historically, the question we always ask is, what is this child or adolescent trying to get from this behavior? Are they trying to manipulate? Are they trying to seek attention? Are they trying to control things, right? That is the natural response that we have to behaviors, and we want to stop that. The more trauma responsive question we should ask when a kid is having a behavior, not to them, but ourselves when we're trying to like kind of dissect the challenge, is what is this behavior telling us about this individual's underlying neurophysiological process in this moment? Right? It's about what is going on inside instead of always assuming it's manipulation. It feels very manipulative often, right? It feels like attention seeking. It's going to be that once in a while because they're kids and adolescents and that is typical. But the majority of the time when we have kids who've experienced trauma, it is not that. It is inside neurobehavioral stuff going on. Also, these strategies are not instinctive or intuitive. I still have to fight my instincts all the time. I want to say a consequence-based thing to my daughter when she's acting up. I want to say all these logical things, but most of the time I'm able to fight it, right? We're also human. There's no way you can do this 100% of the time. We're going to slip up. But then that's when we just say, oops, sorry, and we apologize. And that's good to, to show that humbleness to our kids. Also, though, these approaches acknowledge the developmental age of the child or adolescent, not their chronological age. And we're going to dive into that here in a second. Sticker charts trigger me. I'm not going to lie. If sticker charts work for the kids that you're caring for or working with, I'm glad, keep using them. But if they don't, stop using them and tell the professionals to shove it up wherever you want to tell them to shove it. Because it's their first thing they want to tell us to do is the token economy system and the sticker charts. And there's reasons why it doesn't work great for our kids. The reward center part of the brain is actually impacted by early life trauma. But also when you've lost so much already, you're like, yeah, go ahead, take that away. I don't care. I've already lost so much, right? But also many children and adolescents who have experienced trauma have something called time blindness. So they can tell you what time it is, maybe they can tell you what time something starts, but they don't know what 5 minutes feels like, or 15 minutes, or an hour, or a 6-hour school day, right? They don't know what it feels like passing, the time passing. And so that can cause a lot of kind of transitional challenges with them. And that's part, if we say at the end of the day, if you've earned 5 stickers, here's going to be your reward, that feels like an eternity to them, right? Because I'll bet you the majority of the kids that you're caring for need immediate gratification, like immediate. And so that's why sticker charts don't work for many of them. Again, if it's working, that's great. Sometimes people get mad at me. They're like, well, sticker charts work for my kid. I'm like, that's great. I'm jealous, very jealous, but go ahead and keep using them then. So anyways, developmentally scattered profile. I've used that term a few times. I'm going to give you an example here. Now, this is FASD specific, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder specific. This is looking at a typical 18-year-old who has an FASD. At 18, many of them have the expressive language skills of a 20-year-old, but the emotional maturity and comprehension of a 6-year-old. Their money and time concepts are closer to 8, social skills 7, living skills 11. So this is a developmentally scattered profile. How do you think this young person is going to do going off to college? Or how are they going to do working at Walmart or Target? Or how are they going to do at trade school or barber school or, hairstyling school? Probably isn't going to work super great if this is their developmentally scattered profile. And so we really need to understand how the trauma has impacted our kids because, again, so many of them have these strong expressive language skills and appear age appropriate or even more mature in just conversation until you spend more than an hour or two with them, right? Like, because you guys experience this too, that when you have kids living with you like this, you're dealing with this complete chaos. And then you go out into the community and everybody's like, oh, she's so adorable. He's amazing. And you're like, who the hell are you talking about? Right? It feels like it's crazy making time. And this is why. This is one of the reasons why. So a tool that you can use on this, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I did just write a book. It's up for pre-sale right now on all of the big sites, but it's about raising kids and teens with FASD. But to be honest, it will be helpful even if you don't have kids with FASD. It dives into the big behaviors of raging, lying, and stealing and other things. So anyways, and this tool it will be in the book too, but this is a developmental quadrant. And I did this one. This is an example that I did with a family I was working with in Minnesota when I lived there. Their son was a junior in high school, kept getting suspended for things he was doing during hallway passing time. Parents asked for supervision just during passing time, and the school said, no, he doesn't do it every day, so he just needs to make better choices. Classic school response. So I'm at an IEP meeting and I can hear, the disconnect that the school doesn't understand this young man's brain. So I got up, drew a horizontal vertical line on the whiteboard and put his age of 16 in the top left. And I said, let's figure out where he's functioning at emotionally. So the questions you ask are, how does he respond to something when he's really happy and excited? Is it like a neurotypical 16-year-old would? How does he respond to things when he's mad or frustrated or upset or sick or hurt or injured? Is it like a neurotypical 16-year-old would? So the school staff and the two parents sat and talked, and they decided that he was at about a 5-year-old emotionally. So then I said, okay, socially, does he hang out with neurotypical 16-year-olds? And of course he didn't. He hung out with other neurodivergent students like himself. So I asked the parents, I said, in your neighborhood, in the community picnics or in family functions, is there an age group you see him gravitating towards? And they said his 7 and 8-year-old cousins are his best friends. So they chose 7 as his social age. And then for the cognitive age, we just looked at where he was testing at, and it was at about a 9-year-old. So then what we talk about, the emotional age is what we use to support and connect and build relationship with. So my daughter Akila is 25. I think her, with FASD, we often will say, and this can work with a lot of kids that were just had other traumas, we'll say to take their age and cut it in half, and that's probably closer to where they're functioning at developmentally. And so Akila's 25. Her developmental age on average is about a 10-year-old, I think. And so she lives in Minnesota in a group home. I talk to her on the phone all the time. She's called me 6 times today so far. I haven't answered yet. I'm sure she's losing it. But anyways, when I do, when I talk to her, when I moved 3 years ago to Florida because I was sick of winters, right? And about 5 years ago or something, I was driving her somewhere and it was the first snowfall of the year. And we were both like, oh, gross, yuck, don't like snow. And we decided snow is an evil word and we're not going to say it anymore with each other. And she replaced it with snaking. So on April 1st, they had a big snowstorm in Minnesota. I'm on Zoom with her and she's like, Mom, it's snaking again. I was like, oh, I hate it when it snakes. And this is how that's not typical conversation with a parent and a 25-year-old, but that is still how we connect and build relationships still with her. Now, the social age is what we have to be mindful for around safety and relationships with peers and others. And so if you look at this developmentally scattered profile of this 16-year-old, how do you think he would do with a smartphone with access to the whole internet? Probably not great. And he didn't have a cell phone. It had blown up multiple times with this family. Would we want to drop him off at the mall to hang out with his friends unsupervised all day? No, right? But does that suck for him? Yes. And this is what we are not good at as caregivers and professionals with these young people. We will just sit and shame them. And this is what we used to do. Like Akila still doesn't have a cell phone and she's 25. Now she is so amazing, but she is very extreme in all the behaviors and all the things. And I think there was a reason because it made me be able to train on everything, right? But we used to be, when she would get upset about that, we would be like, well, you were inappropriate. You broke the rules. You weren't safe. You, shame, 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 right? And then when we finally realized that we were not good, effective parents for her, we changed it. And now what I say to her is the parts of your brain that would help you to be safe on that device have not developed enough yet. I am seeing so much growth. You are doing so awesome in so many areas, but those parts of your brain are not ready yet, right? So then, she gives me a hug and says, that's okay, Mama, you're the best. Not. She'll call me every name in the book and she might threaten me, but it used to escalate into a physical rage when we handled it the other way. When we would say, you broke the rules, you can't handle it, you were inappropriate, you even signed a contract and you broke the contract, because we did multiple contracts too. And so anyway, so she'll still get upset, but it doesn't blow up like it used to. And now we mostly just empathize and listen. And I say, I am sorry. I recognize how hard it is to be 25 even in today's world and not have one. She's just too vulnerable. For her, it is either she's going to be the victim of a crime or perpetrate a crime, even if it's just the phone that talks and texts is what, I think she's getting close. We're going to test it soon. But anyways, so the social age, we really have to be mindful of on some of those things around safety and stuff like that. But we also have to acknowledge and empathize with these young people. If there's a rite of passage or, these developmental milestones that they're not having. And this is hard too, because our kids already feel so different, right? When they're in adoptive or foster or kinship settings, they already feel different. And not having a device makes them very different in today's world. And so we have to acknowledge that and try to work through some of those things. When we were doing this, the special ed coordinator for this very large high school had an aha moment. He goes, I just thought of something. He goes, I have 8-year-old twins and I would never let them walk the hallways of this high school unsupervised. And I was like, bingo. So they started to provide this young man with hallway supervision after we did this developmental quadrant. Now, the cognitive age is what we have to work with the school system to make the adjustments and the modifications and accommodations based on where they actually are testing at, not based on what their grade is, right? It kind of blows me away how much we're doing that in school systems where we just keep moving these kids along and putting them in subject matters that don't work for their brains. And that's a big battle. I recognize that. I work in an online coaching program outside of my job here, and it's the number one thing we end up talking about on calls is school challenges that families are dealing with. Okay, we're going to take a test now because I'm going to normally I have a volunteer do it, but I'm going to read the story out loud because of the camera and the virtual thing. So you guys got out of this, but you're all going to shout answers, so pay attention. You're going to have a quiz afterwards. So last Cerny, Fingeldob and Pribben were in the nerdling, treppering gloopy caples and gleaming burly greps. Suddenly, a ditty strezzle boofed into Fingeldob's tresk. Pribben glaped and glaped. Oh, Fingeldob, he chifed, that ditty strezzle is tuning in your grep. So that's the story. Now everybody's going to shout the answers out. Everybody virtually shout them out in your listening groups there. What were the names of the characters in the story? Fingeldob and Pribben. Very good. What happened to Fingeldob's tresk? Yeah, it got boofed into. It got a ditty strezzle boofed into. What did Pribben do? Glapped and glapped, glaped and glaped. Yep. When did the story take place?
Last Cerny.
Last Cerny. Very good. You guys are so smart. Now you got 100% on your quiz. Here's Akila's calling again. On my wrist. So now my final question is, what does the story mean? No clue, right? We have no clue. This is just a little corny exercise to help us understand comprehension, right? We read this story. We have no comprehension of what it means, but we're smart enough and savvy enough to answer the questions. And our kids with trauma histories do this all the time. We call it masking, right? They're very good at masking. And nobody likes to feel dumb, right? You think about it, sometimes you're maybe in a conversation with somebody and they say something and you don't understand it and you ask again, and maybe you even ask for them to explain it a third time, and then you just nod and act like you understand it even though you don't, right? I mean, I do that all the time. But right? But our kids do that day to day, multiple times a day, many of them, right? And in particular, in certain situations, they're more likely to do it. I was a legal guardian for 3 years for a young man in Minnesota who had FASD. His family hired me to do that. Brought him to an intake meeting for adult mental health case management. He did a great job. We came up with this whole plan. We got in the car to drive him home, and I said, well, what'd you think of that? And he cursed all the time. He's like, I have no effing clue what you guys were talking about. And I was like, what? Because he really was very engaged in this meeting. And I was like, what? And he goes, I just said whatever I thought you both wanted to hear so that meeting would be over. And I realized my own daughter was doing the same thing, especially in meetings like IEP meetings, intake meetings, case management meetings. Who likes those meetings? Nobody, and especially not the kids, right? And they just want them over with. So I started to realize that this was both of them were doing it in meetings, but it also happens in day-to-day interaction with these kids. It might be maybe one of the chores or expectations you have of your kid, if you still are trying to get them to do chores, right? Anyways, is empty the dishwasher. Well, look at how many steps there are to emptying a dishwasher, how many different drawers and cabinets you have to open, where you have to put. It's very complicated, and maybe they've done it 47 times in a row. It's kind of unlikely for our kids, but maybe they have. And now all of a sudden today they're not doing it, and we think that they're just being lazy and avoidant, but it really might be that they can't remember the steps, but they don't say that to us because they don't want to look dumb. So instead they just don't do it. And now we're assuming that they're being lazy, avoidant, all of disrespectful, all those things. And it might just be that the brain isn't firing right in those moments. So really dig into comprehension to figure out if they're getting stuff all the time. Okay, so some other top strategies, reminding ourselves that we're dealing with brain things. The behaviors look willful. They look like willful disobedience. It is rarely that, is usually a brain function that is not working right. Also being patient and giving grace. So the story I share on this all the time is, I have a good friend whose mother died from Alzheimer's years ago, and she was in memory care towards the end of life, and they all took turns. The whole family took turns bringing her to church every Sunday. One Sunday, it was the 21-year-old grandson brought her to church, and they were Catholic, and so they went up during Mass for communion, and the priest gave the wafer to Grandma and said, "Body of Christ," and Grandma said, "I don't want that fucking wrinkly wafer." To a priest, right? Her grandson is super embarrassed, and he's whispering, "Grandma, it's okay." And she's like, "F if it is," really loud. I'll only say the F word once today. I gave myself a limit. My boss is here, but I probably shouldn't have even done it that time. Anyways, so the priest gives him her a different wafer, which was also effed up, and she had this huge F-bomb explosion. She's escorted out of church by some people up in the front. So my friend calls, tells me the story. We laugh hysterically. You have to laugh at some of these hard caregiver stories. But then she said a thing that changed my life. She said, "It reminds me a lot of your Aquila stories." And I was like, yes, I have stories just like that, even at church with the F-bomb. But I got off the phone and I was like, wait a minute, look at all the similarities and how the behaviors play out for people with any form of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's, Lewy body, frontal temporal, whatever, and our kids' behaviors, right? And again, now Aquila has fetal alcohol and it's very similar, but even just kids with trauma in general sometimes. As my friend's mom's disease was progressing, she was physically aggressive and attacking staff and family. Now, not everybody with Alzheimer's gets physically aggressive, but not everybody with FASD or trauma brains does also, right? Lying is very common in memory care, only we're able to reframe it into something called confabulation, which I'm going to dive into in a few minutes. Stealing is common in memory care for people that used to never steal. Hoarding food is common in memory care for people that never had food insecurities, right? So there's all of these similar behaviors, but here's the difference is, did they take away Grandma's cell phone that night? Did they say no screen time for you, Grandma? Did they say you don't get to go on the field trip to the bingo hall this week? Nope, but they knew Grandma when her brain was healthy before it had Alzheimer's, and they knew she never would have said the F-bomb to a priest when her brain was healthy. Now, our kids deserve the same grace, patience, and understanding we would give somebody in memory care, because many of them were born with compromised brains if there was in utero trauma, or experienced it in early life from other trauma and neglect and abuse that they experienced. So they deserve, now I'm not saying it's easy and fun, right? These big behaviors, but they deserve us responding in a different way instead of so punishing and things like that and shaming. So also we've got to change the environment, right? So we had to start decorating our house differently. We had to start we had a gun safe. We've never had guns, but we had to start locking up wallets, purses, car keys, candlelight, like kept having to get bigger safes as she was getting older, right? But even just how we decorated the room, we had to switch who shared bedrooms. My husband and I had to move into the 3-season sun porch in Minnesota with no heat, right? Now I'm in menopause, that would be lovely. Fine now. But it was hard back then. You could see your breath while you were sleeping, right? But it was a sacrifice we made for, for my other daughter not to have to share a bedroom with Aquila, who's so challenging. So we've got to make some changes. Also, don't ask why. We love to ask them, why did you do this? Why did you hit your sibling? Why did you whatever? And what do they say? I don't know. And then we push, and then they start to confabulate. And now we're mad at them because they're lying to us, we think, but it's not. So don't ask why. Don't match fire with fire. I'm going to dive into that here in a minute. And then also forgive, forget, and move on. My daughter is so awesome, but she has made my life very hard. Very, 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 very hard, right? But she wasn't doing it intentionally. It is not her fault. And she is also amazing. And so I see often where a lot of us families get stuck with blocked care and get to a point where we are mad at this kid and resent this kid. And we want to not get stuck there. It's a normal phase to hit that, right? Because what we're also dealing with is grief and loss. Our kids are dealing with significant grief and loss over the trauma and the loss that they've experienced. We're dealing with that too, especially if you have kids with these big behaviors. We're dealing with that because we've lost some normalcy, whatever that is, right? And other things like that. So we just don't want to get stuck there. Okay, so I'm going to dive into the raging to start here. First of all, here's my little disclaimer. All kids are different. You know your kids best. But most of these things I recommend trying, but there might be a thing here I'm going to say, and you're like, there's no way that would work for this kid. You know them best, right? So I was the parent. Again, Akila has a huge history of physical aggression. She lives in a group home by herself with 2 staff 24/7. That's how hard she is, but she's thriving because she has the right supports around her right now. She has gone for 3.5 years with no physical aggression. Give her a hand, right? I mean, that is, I literally didn't know if we would ever, and I'm not saying it's completely gone, but that's huge. That's a huge win with somebody who has extreme aggression. So I was the parent that was going to every conference, seminar, workshop like you guys are, and the doctors would do their training, and then it'd be Q&A time, and my hand would go up, and I'd be like, that's all great and cute, but what do we do about this raging? And they would say, well, figure out what the triggers are and avoid them. That's good advice. But the biggest trigger is that word there, no. Even if we don't say no, they know we're saying no when we're dancing around no. I now just say no to her. I don't dance around it anymore. When she was younger, I'd always try to do that, but now I just get straight to the no. You can't avoid that. We cannot give them everything they want immediately when they want it, because that is the biggest trigger, is not getting what they want immediately when they want it for so many of these kids. And you can't avoid that. And so a lot of the sensory-based triggers, especially you can, or some of the transition ones and things like that. The other things the professionals say then would be try to distract them, which is also good advice, because distractions will work sometimes. The key word there is sometimes. There are going to be times when you might have the most brilliant distraction and it's not going to work just based on where their brain is in that moment, right? But it's worth trying because sometimes it will work. The more unique, creative, silly kind you can get on the distractions, the better. One time when I was driving Akila and Mowgli, that's her boyfriend, who we claim him as our 5th child. Now he wants us to adopt him, but they've been dating for 8 years, so obviously we can't. But we claim him as our fictive kin 5th one because he doesn't want me to be his mother-in-law. He wants me to be his mom. Anyways, I'm driving them home from a date several years ago, and she started to verbally escalate. They're in the back seat. It was, and I just drove around. I didn't drive to their group homes. I just kept driving around this residential neighborhood, trying to remain calm. It was only verbal at this point. It was almost an hour later, and she's still just going to town verbally, the cussing, the threatening, all the things. And finally, I stopped in the middle of a residential street. I didn't even pull over to the side. Rolled all 4 windows down and blasted their music, which was on my Bluetooth at top volume. And I got out and started dancing in the middle of the street. And I'm not a good dancer. And I was trying to even look more silly. And she was laying down, and Mowgli's like, Boo, you got to sit up. You got to look at Mama. And she sits up, and they both start laughing. I open the door. I pull their hands out. I'm like, dance with me. We danced. We made a video that we had to put on Instagram. Don't look for it. It's been deleted. We had to FaceTime 2 people. We probably were out there 20 to 30 minutes dancing. People are looking out their windows. It's like 8 p.m. on a night in August. Starting to get dark. Nobody called the police this time. And other times we've had the police called on us. But got him in the car, got him home and dropped him off. Now in the past, I would have driven to the group home while she was raging and the staff would have blown it up and the police would have been called in an ambulance and it would have been a horrific night, right? So it took an hour and a half extra of my time, but it technically saved me 6 to 12 more hours, right? And thousands of dollars of taxpayer money too, because every time we call the police and an ambulance, that's money, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't call the police or an ambulance, by the way. I'm just saying I do try to avoid it personally. And in particular, my children are Black. And so there is a dynamic of that. And we were raising them really close to where George Floyd was murdered in inner city Minneapolis. So there's a lot of dynamics we have to be mindful of too. Anyways, the distractions are going to work sometimes. The more silly you can get, the better. I recommend if you have kids with these hard behaviors that you document it, that you either have an app on your phone or a notebook where you put down the date, the time, when did they last eat, what were they upset about, what distractions did you try, did they work, and what would you do differently next time? Because here's what happens is you can recycle these distractions back in. Now, you can't do the same one every time. I also, she's a drama queen, so I'll be like, oh, when I see her enter the yellow zone of regulation, like, oh, my phone's vibrating, hold on, hello? And I make it a dramatic thing. I'm like, oh, what hospital are you at? Or like something like that. And she's like, what's going on? I'm like, hold on. And then I get off the phone and I make up a story. And yes, I lie to avoid rages. I do, I lie to avoid rages, I admit it. And so, but I can't do that every time. Every time if she enters the yellow zone, if I fake a phone call, she's going to figure it out. But you can recycle them back every 3 or 4 months and you will forget some brilliant distractions that you did. You will. My husband did one once. He came home. We had an in-home therapist. Akila had just tried to punch me and I had her by the wrists. Well, this therapist's eyes were popping out of her head. And my husband walked in the front door and he couldn't see us, but he could hear us. And he's like, Akila, come here. I need your help tracking an animal. So it was the winter, and again, we lived in the inner city, but he saw probably rabbit tracks or something in the snow. She went flying, got her coat and boots on, and they went outside looking for an animal. And now I sit down with the therapist who's now swearing, like, what the F is that? I was like, yeah, I know, right? But anyways, you got it. So keep track of these things. So we started doing respite for teenage boys with fetal alcohol and challenging behaviors. And we had this one young man, his name is Matthew. He tells me I can share his first name. He had been with us many times. He's 18. He raged so much in school in first grade, he was referred to a setting for special ed school. Now by 7th or 8th grade, he outgrew his raging. So if you've got somebody with these raging behaviors, it will start to dissipate eventually. I can't tell you when. It's different. Again, Akila's 25, and so it was in her early 20s when it started to simmer down for her. But Matthew was in the car with Akila and 2 of my other kids, and when she had another car rage. And this one got physical immediately. I had to pull over into an empty parking lot. It was a chaotic scene of about an hour of her chasing us around with the ice scraper, which another reason I had to move. Those are dangerous weapons. I don't need them anymore in Florida. Got it under control, got everybody back into the car, got home, put everybody to bed, but I kept Matthew up to now process the new trauma respite he's got here, trauma and respite. So he had a lot of insights into his own past. And then he said, you were really irritating me, Barb. And I was like, what? I thought it was so good. You guys, I can stay calm for 2 hours when she's raging before I lose my temper. Most people have 10 to 15 minutes, if even that, right? And I'm talking like calling me every name in the book, hitting, kick, all the things, and I can stay calm. So I thought I was good. And because the other thing, the professionals, they told me to figure out the triggers and avoid them, try to distract, keep yourself calm, and call 911 if you don't feel safe. Only advice any professional ever gave us. And so, anyways, I'm like, well, what did I do wrong? And he said, you kept telling her to calm down, and that drives me nuts. So I found this quote, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down. And it's very, very true. Very, very true, right? And I'm like, very good point, Matthew. What else? And he said, you kept repeating her name and that drives me nuts. And I'm like, never thought about that. Thank you. Good point. What else? And he said, he used the R word. He said, I spoke to her like she was intellectually disabled. So here's how I used to be when she would enter the yellow zone or the red zone. Sometimes we don't see that yellow zone. It's almost always there. It can be really short, but sometimes we miss it. And so whichever of the zones it is, I would be like, Akila, honey, it's okay. Akila, calm down, honey. Akila, calm down. This is no big deal, honey. I would go into repeat mode. right? I'd be repeating myself. I thought I was modeling co-regulation by calm down, right? All these things. And it wasn't helpful. So I started to think about it. If my husband Michael was here and we were in a heated argument about something, if that fool told me to calm down, I would not receive that. I would not receive that well. And he's tried it early in the marriage, about 30 years ago. He learned his lesson fast. But anyways, also, if he kept saying my name, that would bug me. You don't say somebody's name unless you're trying to get their attention or being a condescending, making a condescending point, right? And so I started thinking more in depth about the things that I would say and do. So I have a list, 2 pages here of things I recommend not to say when they're starting to escalate. Don't tell them to calm down. Don't repeat their name. Don't slow down your speech. Again, though, you might have a younger child or even a child that has maybe even a lower IQ, and that slowing down the speech is what you need to do and modeling that co-regulation. So this is where you got to figure out who the kid is you're talking about. But most of our kids, by their time they're a pre-adolescent and beyond, that slowing down the speech is going to be condescending. This is when these kids are likely to be cursing and having inappropriate language and maybe threatening you with graphic details of how they're going to hurt you. I hope you're not dealing with that, but I know some of you are. In these moments, what we have to be mindful of is that these kids are not in a learning brain place. They are down in their primitive brain in the amygdala, right? Where that fight, flight, freeze, fawn part of the brain is. And so it's not a learning place. And so if we sit there and say, put a quarter in the swear jar, that language is not acceptable in this family, whatever it is, doesn't even go in one ear and out the other because their brain is too on fire. So I just let all of that go. I don't even respond to any of it. Now, a lot of families will be like, how do you do that? Because it just like grates on. I almost disassociate in the moments, to be honest, you guys. I'm just like, do. And don't take it personally. It's not personal. Even if what they are saying is a personal attack, right? Even if they're sitting there calling you fat, if you are overweight, it's not because of that. It's just they're grasping for straws and it feels personal, but it isn't personal. Also, don't point out consequences. Hopefully I can get you guys to move away from using consequences and punishments all the time. But even then, even when we had moved away from that type of parenting, but sometimes when she would start to escalate, I would point out a natural consequence, right? Like kids aren't going to want to play with you if they see you hitting your sibling or something like that. Even a natural consequence is perceived as a threat to somebody in their amygdala. They're sitting there in their regulatory system. They're not perceiving things accurately in these moments. And so it feels like a threat. So that is a big reason why those things don't work in the moment. Also, don't tell them what they're upset about is easy to fix and no big deal. Even if it's just because you're out of Chips Ahoy cookies and this is why they're losing it, right? Because we all know it's over the tiniest things sometimes. We don't want to say that to them because it feels very stressful in the moment and it feels like a mountain in front of them. And that is kind of condescending and demeaning to to make them think that they shouldn't be so upset about it. Be mindful of terms of endearment, right? Well, I think about that. If my husband and I are in an argument and he calls me sweetie, I'm like, oh, I'm not your sweetie right now, right? So again, you also might have those young kids where you need to use those terms. So you got to just figure that out. But be mindful of eye contact. And eye contact, there's a lot of cultural differences with eye contact too, right? The Native American community and Asian cultures have very different levels of eye contact than our dominant white culture has, for example. So we don't want to have intimidating eye contact when we've got kids in their amygdala and their primitive brain. But we also don't want to be dismissive and just sit on our phones or start washing dishes and not giving them the attention in this moment. So you have to find the right balance based on who this kid is developmentally in that moment. Another big mistake that we used forever was logic, right? Most of these kids are not logical thinkers when their brains are online. And when their brains are offline, logic is gone. I would sit there at 2 in the morning and be like, honey, I can't take you to Target to buy a Barbie doll. They're closed, right? That didn't matter right now. And what's happening is most of these kids have auditory processing deficits, right? And when their brains are on fire, it's almost non-existent. And so we start talking so much, they can't slow their brains down because we're explaining things to them logically and they're trying to process it and they can't slow their brains down because of how hard it's working to process all of our words. So my biggest piece of advice is stop talking. right? We just need to stop talking so much in these moments. And it works much better. So I have a shorter list of what to do, got a long list of what not to do. Again, if you have other children, you want to remove them. If most of you aren't going to have the kid, if you have a kid with these behaviors, most of them will not remove themselves, right? Go to your room until you're feeling better, or why don't you, go take a break over here or there. That's not going to work. So a lot of times you have to remove yourself or the other children. We had a code word in our family. It was either pineapple or kiwi. And when mom or dad said that one of those words, that meant run to your rooms and lock the doors. It's going to get dicey for a bit here. Eventually, we had a safety plan with different neighbors' house that they would go to and stuff like that. Try the distraction, try all of those things. But the biggest piece of advice is just stop talking so much. Some of the kids, you have to figure out which kid you have. Some of the kids you can ask a question like, what do you need from me right now, or how can I help you? Now, questions though, in the disability world, for example, we say and even in child welfare, we say that we need to give kids choices, right? Because they feel so powerless. Well, choices causes a lot of anxiety and stress to some of these kids. I cannot ask my daughter, even if I just are like, do you want grilled cheese or peanut butter and jelly for lunch? Oh, didn't know that was a stressful question, right? Like, but when her brain is on fire, definitely questions stress her to no end. So I can't ask her a question, but if you have the kids that you can ask a question, do it. And again, now, if when you ask them that, what do you need from me right now? And they're like, I need you to go to, Best Buy and buy me a $5,000 computer or whatever it is, like, obviously can't do that. And so you just kind of don't respond to, you're just like, oh, okay, well, that's not going to work right now, or something like that. That's not usually what happens. But if you have the kid where you can't ask a question, instead, if we can say some kind of empathetic, supportive statement, like, I'm so sorry you're feeling like this, or I'm going to stay here with you, or something like that. Even when you say something like that, they might cuss you out, right? And that is just your cue to stop talking, stop responding, and just let it go. She moved into the group home she's in 3.5 years ago. They made all kind of promises that they didn't follow through on, including they were going to let me train the staff. First 2 months were absolute hell. Police were being called daily. Staff were walking off shifts in the middle of a shift and quitting and leaving her alone because she was raging and raging and raging. She moved in on October 23rd. December 27th, they let me train the staff, and that was the last day she's been physically aggressive towards staff. So I'm not saying that your kids are going to stop being aggressive if you use these strategies, but I think it will start to decrease. And eventually I do think it can go away. But we learned way too late in the game. We were causing most of the rages. We were causing her to go higher into the red zone and to stay there longer by saying and doing a lot of typical things that a lot of professionals were telling us to do. Right? So I think it can help to decrease the level of raging that you'll see. Also, another important thing to be mindful of is that for people, neurotypical individuals who don't have a lot of trauma, it can take close to 2 hours to completely recover from a big stressful thing like a rage. For a neurodivergent person with a trauma history, it can take at least 24 hours or longer. And you've all heard the term trauma fog. And even like, so for me, there was several years ago, took Akila and Mowgli on a 3-4 day vacation, and it was horrific, full of raging. It was actually 5 years ago. It was right before the pandemic started. And by the time we got back to the state of Minnesota, my friend who helped me, I was not functioning at my normal for almost a week. After 3 full days of raging, I was in a trauma fog and not functioning at my normal level. And so a lot of times we're sitting here with these kids 30 minutes after a rage, trying to get them to apologize, trying to get them to talk about it. And many of them are not in a place physically or emotionally where they can do that yet. And so we want to be mindful. Now, so you might also have the kid who's the outlier, who you need to talk about it, or they're going to perseverate and re-escalate, right? So again, but most of them we need to wait. The other thing too, though, is if you have kids that are prone to these high behaviors, we don't need to process every single episode. All we are going to do is impact their self-esteem and their relationship and connection with us if we sit down and have to lecture them and have to talk about every single behavior. So be mindful of that. Another thing too that we can do is a couple of days later, when we find them in a good, clear brain place, we can say, hey, you know, on Sunday when you're upset because we were out of Chips Ahoy, you know, what could we have done differently? Or what was there anything we did that bothered you? Like, see if they have some insight and ideas. Some kids will, some won't. Now, Akila historically has not been very insightful, and just in the last 1 to 2 years, she's starting to have some more insight when we have these conversations with her. So it's worth a try. Okay, so I mentioned this term confabulation. Who here is really familiar with confabulation? Anybody? A handful of you. Yeah, it is a fascinating term that we all need to, everybody in society needs to learn this term. I don't know why they don't teach it to us. My daughter's most famous confabulation was when she had stolen a cell phone, one of dozens of cell phones that she had stolen. And she said it was Justin Bieber's cell phone and he gave it to her because that's realistic, right? And this is when I was a ding dong parent, and this is back when we were trying to catch her in the lie all the time to teach her to catch her in the lie so we could teach her not to lie, right? That's typical parenting. Don't do that anymore, you guys. Anyways, I kept fighting and fighting. The story got bigger and wackier, right? She said that he was performing at an assembly at their school, which he was not. She said he sang 40 some songs. He changed his outfit 4 times, and Selena Gomez was there too, and all these things. I got on my computer, pulled up his touring schedule. He was in Brazil, right? So I think it's my mic drop, I win. And she's like, Mom, it was first hour. He could have gotten on a plane to Brazil in time. How does she know that? She was right, but how does she can't remember what 2 times 2 is? But she can break any firewall on a security thing. But anyways, so I lost, even though I knew I was right. That's confabulation. Confabulation is when our brains fill in the gaps of our memory with wrong information. All of your brains do this, right? If you're married or if you've had a relationship, if you ever had one of those arguments with your significant other where you're like, I told you this, and they say, no, you didn't. And you say, yes, I did. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, you didn't. It's very rare that one of you is lying in those moments, but one of your brains is confabulating. In my marriage, it's always my husband. So not true. That's so not true. He loves it when I say that. Mine does it all the time. But anyways, you know, that's how healthier brains confabulate. But neurodivergent brains with trauma and all, FASD and all of that stuff will do those kind of confabulations, but they also do the Justin Bieber confabulation. My friend, one of my closest friends' sister has dementia. She told her over a year ago that I texted the sister saying I won the Publishing Clearinghouse sweepstakes. Not true. I probably wouldn't be here right now then, right? But her sister isn't lying. Her brain is making her think that's true. That is confabulation. So we're able to recognize that in memory care, right? As confabulation, but we don't ever figure it out with our kids that have these neurodivergent brains. So the most likely times for them to confabulate is when their anxiety is high. So number 1, when they're in trouble, right? Number 2, when they're trying to socially fit in somewhere. And then when they're trying to understand or comprehend things that, or remember things that they think they should. Their brain goes on fire and because they can't remember something, they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, and it starts filling in the gaps, right? So what we started doing probably just about 4 or 5 years ago is we started to teach Akila the word confabulation. We say because of your brain injury, sometimes your brain does this thing called confabulation where it's trying to confuse you or trick you and make you think things are true that aren't. And you have to let us help you know that because otherwise people think you're lying and they don't want to be around you. And you guys, that has worked really well with her. And I'm so sad we weren't doing that her whole life, right? She was probably 20 when we figured that out. Imagine how many rages we could have avoided over the years when we were pushing her about lying. And it turned into a big blow up thing. The relational loss that we had because the connection and the relationship is impacted on both sides when you think a kid is lying to you all the time, right? And when they're being accused of lying, but they don't think they're lying, you know, it really is interesting. So what's cool is now when she does start to confabulate and we stop her and say that, she'll just be like, and then try to switch the subject immediately. But she has several times stopped herself in a confabulation and said, Mom, is my brain doing the big word? Because she can't remember the word. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Rockstar, it was the first time we had to go out to Red Lobster to celebrate. That was a big win, right? So understanding, and here's the thing, people will say to me, how do we know if it's lying or confabulation? You don't need to expend energy into that. Just always treat it like it's confabulation and you're going to win. You're going to win then. Who cares? Let go of the lying. Again, it's so funny, not funny, but sometimes I like when I have families who get really bothered by the lying, I'm like, does your kid rage too? And they're like, no. I'm like, oh, okay, that's it. If you got a kid that rages, you don't care about all those other things as much, right? But okay, so the stealing then, here's how we finally got to handle it. So our first memory of Akila stealing was when she was 2 in our church nursery. And then at age 6 is when we threw away her blankie to try to teach her to stop stealing. Didn't work. So then, you fast forward many years later, she was probably 12, I think, when this story happened. We sat down with her and we said, we're starting to understand that stealing is one of the symptoms of your brain injury. We want to work really closely with you to help you to learn not to steal. We're not going to be mad at you or disappointed, and we're not going to punish you if you steal, but we will talk about it every time. So one of the next times that she had stolen, of course, it was a cell phone. And so I brought it to her and I said, honey, who do I need to get this back to? So even the way I brought it up was not a way that instantly made her feel dumb and anxious, right? And she said, that's Dr. So-and-so's, and this is a true story. And I was like, oh, our school superintendent? And she said, yes. And I'm like, okay, so where was it when you took it? And she goes, well, I go in the district offices at lunch to talk to the secretaries every day because she is super sweet and social when she's not mad, right? She's lovely. And so, so she went in there that day and nobody was there and they had left the door unlocked. So I said, when you saw the phone sitting on his desk, what did you feel right away? And she goes, I got really excited, Mom. And I said, okay, what happened next? And she goes, I grabbed it. And I said, how did it feel when you were first holding it? And she goes, it felt so good, Mom, because I've wanted a phone my whole life, right? And I was like, yeah, I know that. Dozens of phones later, right? So then I asked her, I'm like, a few questions about how he felt, how the secretaries felt, how whoever left the door unlocked maybe got in trouble. And then I said, well, how do you feel now about having taken it? And she said, not good. And I said, why? And she said, because that's stealing. Now, some of our kids, especially with FASD, actually don't understand ownership, right? If you think of toddlers, the toddler rule of ownership, those concrete brains. Now, a lot of our kids, though, as they're getting older, will understand ownership, but Akila doesn't have the impulse control to control those impulses. And so we had for several years been trying to teach her with an outside therapist and with the school that when she felt that urge or impulse to take something that wasn't hers, that she should tell a closest adult. I had gone to the custodians, the lunchroom staff, the secretaries, the teachers, everybody in that building knew if Akila comes to you and says this, say, I am so proud of you for telling me, let's go to the office and find somebody to help you process this. So I said to her, what should you have done when you felt that impulse to take that phone? And she said, I was supposed to tell the closest adult. And I said, why didn't you? And she looks at me like I'm a ding dong and she goes, I told you there weren't any there. Yeah. Duh, right? I'm like, oh, right. Yeah, silly me. So then where's the next closest adult? The nurse's office right next door, right? Because again, problem solving, if you have executive functioning deficits, which many of our kids with trauma histories do, you can't solve problems well and you're very concrete. And so, that is how we started to handle the stealing. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that was the last time she stole, right? It took 1.5 years of that approach, and she has now not stolen for over a decade. So what happens though is when we changed our whole paradigm of how we responded to these behaviors, it allowed her anxiety to stay low, which allowed her to actually have the conversations and make those connections eventually that helped her to learn to not steal. So I kind of call this type of caregiving wussy parenting, wussy caregiving. And I'll tell you what, I am not a wuss. I am kind of a badass warrior, but the world judges me to be too lenient and wussy, right? That's why I use the term wuss. But it's because everybody all the time is like, I can't believe you would let your daughter talk to you like that. I can't, but you need to take this away. You need to punish her. You need to this, you need that. And I just smile. I'm like, yeah, you don't think we tried that stuff? I want to say, kind of want to give them the birds what I want to do. But anyways, so these strategies really, really will work and help. Another thing too, this will be in my book, this BEARS acronym. So BEARS is something I recommend when you start to feel frustrated with your kids. If there's a behavior, something's going on, think BEARS. So B stands for brain first. If you can always, because what we usually assume is this is a kid being a little jerk, being willfully disobedient, being naughty, making bad choices, all of those things. Instead, we want to come at it from a brain-based perspective. E stands for, can you do a really quick assessment of what their emotional age is in this moment? And I can guarantee you with the majority of these kids, it's probably a toddler. is where their emotional brain goes to in the moments of stress and wanting something, or what, whatever it is that they're getting worked up about. They go into toddler brains often, or maybe early elementary, something like that. A stands for, can you figure out what the origin of their anxiety is? What is it that has them all anxious? And I'm going to give you a few examples here of this in a minute. And then whatever you're going to say or do, can it have a relational component and a sensory intervention? So this is bears. This is what I recommend that we start to think about. And I just actually, at the beginning of the pandemic is when I kind of came up with this bears, when I came up with bears. Akila had come home for the first home visit from her group home, right? That whole pandemic thing started in March, right? I was with Pat, and Terry. Is Terry in here right now? Probably not. I was doing a training at the Foundling, was that it, in Manhattan on March 14th when they were shutting everything down. It was the weirdest time to be here, right? And anyways, so from that date until July, we didn't get to physically see Akila, right? Because the group home's locked down and we couldn't visit and she couldn't come home. So she's home for her first home visit in many months. And in the middle, she was sleeping over. In the middle of the night, I go to check on her, and she had found an old cell phone and had found a charger and had it, set up as a Wi-Fi enabled device. And I'm like, oh, good gracious, this is bad. This could be really bad. Because so for her, she'll get on Snapchat, dating apps, and she will be communicating with hundreds of men within a few hours. And so anyways, I laid down on the floor in the dark and I said, oh, honey, mom is so sorry. I should not have left that out. I set you up. That was so unfair of me. I need you to give me the phone. Do you think she gave me the phone? Of course not. I'm not a baby. I'm not an effing baby. You treat me like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh God. So I just laid there over an hour trying different strategies to get her to give me the phone, right? And it's like 3:30 in the morning when this whole thing is starting. I'm laying there now. It's almost 4:30, and now she's starving because she hasn't gone to bed. So she keeps complaining of being hungry. I've tried a bunch of different bribery. I've tried all these different things. Nothing's working. And so I'm laying there, and I'm like, and this is when I started thinking, okay, Barb, think about what is going on inside right now of her. What has her all anxious? Because I can even just see her sitting there, and just the way she's tapping on the phone, I can see the anxiety, the way she's tapping on it. And so I thought about it, and I'm like, she's super young emotional age right now, and she's feeling connected, right? Because when you don't have a cell phone or technology in today's world, it's hard to feel connected. And I knew, I'm like, she's likely communicating with dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of men, and needs to get their phone numbers and finish these conversations. So I said, you know what, honey, how about this? How about I go make us, I hate cooking. I am a horrible cook. The only thing I'm good at cooking is scrambled eggs, right? What like 8-year-olds can make. And so I'm like, oh, I know, honey, I'm getting hungry too. How about I go make some scrambled eggs, and then I'll give you 10 minutes, and then we'll trade. I'll give you the eggs and you give me the phone because I'm hungry too. And she's like, 15. And I'm like, done. Because I always start low, giving her space to negotiate, right? I go make the eggs. I'm peering in. I look in the room as they're cooking. I'm looking in the room, and I'm seeing her writing stuff down and putting paper in her backpack. I make the eggs come in. We make the trade. And we eat the eggs together, hug it out, and go to bed. Now in the morning, I get up, I go grab her backpack, and I find this note with all these men's names and phone numbers. And I'm like, well, I could throw this away, but if she notices it before I bring her back to the home, she's going to have a full-on rage, or she'll rage there when she realizes it later. So I just took the pen and I just changed some of the numbers to like 7s to 1. Put her right back in there, and there we go, right? And never heard about it again. So we got to just think out of the box. Yeah, you got to think out of the box and do things a little differently. So another example of this, in the group home she lived in before the one she's in currently, one day she woke up in the summer and she was really hot, and she is thermostat obsessed. Anybody got thermostat obsessed kids? That can be a common thing. Goes straight to the thermostat, and it was set at a higher number than it normally is. This was in the summer also. And she got mad instantly. And the staff person, unfortunately, started explaining to her the logical reasons of why they turned it up overnight, how the girls whose bedrooms are in the basement were getting too cold, and the difference between heat and cooling on different levels of a home. Science, right? Science. Science and math are not my girl's thing or my thing either. Anyways, before you know it, she's in a huge rage, grabs a frying pan, attacks the staff person, injures them. Police are called, ambulance is called, and she's hauled off to the hospital for like 10 or 12 hours. So the manager calls, tells me the situation, and I said, well, what did you say to that staff of how they should have handled that differently? And he said, I don't understand what you're saying. And I was like, I think I need a new group home then. I didn't say that, I thought it. I had a filter. Anyways, I said to him, what I would have thought, if I was sitting there, I would have been like, oh my gosh, Akila, I've been hot all morning and I didn't even think of looking at the thermostat. Thank you. Oh my gosh, let's put it down to 66. If it does not cool off within an hour, we might need to call the maintenance people over here. I don't know what's going on, but in the meantime, are you okay? What do you need? Do you want to take a cold shower? Do you need something cold to drink? Do you want an ice pack? How can I help you? We wouldn't have had a rage. We wouldn't, how many thousands of dollars? Police, 10 to 12 hours in an ER. They put a security guard outside your room when you're there for behavioral reasons. Social workers, nurses, doctors in and out of the room. How many thousands of dollars? I got to try to figure that out sometime, figure out how many thousands of dollars were spent that day, that were wasted that day. And new layer of trauma for Akila. Every time the police is called, that is trauma, right? And new layers of trauma for the staff as well, who were injured and hurt. So thinking out of the box and just a little bit differently can really help a lot with these kids. Okay, I got 10 minutes left. I'm going to tell you the Polly Pocket story. It's one of my favorites. So when I was first trying to use these different type of strategies, right? Parenting, connected, relational parenting. One day I was like, okay, we're going to have a good day. Because I was at that point where I hated it when there was no school. I hated weekends. I hated summer. I hated winter break, spring break, right? And I was sitting there all day. I'm like, okay, we're going to have a good night. I made a schedule on a whiteboard and I made it look cute, which is not my jam. I'm not crafty or cute. And I had choices and all the things. And I'm like, it's going to be a great night. I'm going to be really connected and relational and attuned and ready to go. And her bus came home first and the door flew open. And I knew I was screwed by just the way the door opened. And she's like, Mom, we got to go to Target and buy a Polly Pocket airplane. And I was like, what? Wait, no, look at my schedule. Look at this. We're going to make cookies. You get to choose. And she's like, Mom, doesn't matter. We've got to go to Target. I need a Polly Pocket airplane. It is not a want, it's a need. Because just saying it makes it a need, right? And I'm like, well, what made you think of that? I'm trying to distract you. It doesn't matter. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, you know what? That would be great fun to have. And, we celebrate Christmas in our family. And this was a month or two before that. I'm like, let's put that on your Christmas list. She's like, no, I need it now. And I'm like, well, let's look them up online, see how much they cost. And we can make a chore chart and you can earn it. I need it now. I'm like, if you do all the chores today, we could even go later on tonight and get it. But that didn't work either because she needed it this hot moment, right? Y'all know those kids. I know many of you have those kids. So then my anxiety inside is ramping up big time from my own PTSD from all of these rages. So then I'm like, I thought of a question. I'm like, I got a question, Akila. Where does Polly want to go? And she's like, what? I'm like, well, she must be planning a vacation. If she needs an airplane, where is she going to go? And she thought about it and she goes, Hawaii. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to go to Hawaii. I've never been there. And we've got a camper for Polly. We've got jet skis. We've got a limousine with a hot tub in it, everything but a stupid plane, right? So I'm like, let's go fill the bathtub up. You can put your swimsuit on and we'll take the jet skis to Hawaii. It'll be fun and I'll play with you, right? And she's like, no, Mom, she's never ridden on a plane and she wants to take her first plane ride. And I'm like, shoot. Oh, he is gone. I could swear again now. I'm kidding. So I was like, shoot. Okay. So then I thought about it and I'm like, okay, hold on. I'm going to go find a plane. Polly is a little rubber flexible doll this big, right? I got boys, girls. I got every toy in the world or so I thought. I'm looking through all the rooms in the family room. I can't find a stupid airplane anywhere in my whole house. I got Polly sitting in lots of boats, but she wasn't going for the boats. So then I'm like, oh my gosh, I really want to avoid the raging tonight. And I came up with one last idea. And that was, I'm like, I know, Akila, let's you and I build an airplane out of Legos together. It'll be fun. I'll do it with you. She didn't like that either. And she raged all night. The reason I tell this story is, so one of my mentors, who was my boss, who Pat knows well, Kim Stevens, who worked at Families Rising for over 20 years. She's our board chair now. She said to me several years ago, she's like, Barb, I don't think you should tell the Polly Pocket story because it didn't work. And I said, that's why I need to tell it. It's exactly what I don't want to give any false ideas to any families or professionals that if you do all of these things that I'm saying or other professionals say that you're never going to have behaviors. That's not realistic, right? It's not realistic. Now, another day, this Polly Pocket story thing would have worked. but that day it didn't. I did this training for a large children's hospital system in a different state with their entire psychology department, the neuropsychologists, psychiatrists, and psychologists. And after I told that story, I stopped and I said, what did I do wrong? What did I miss? And this one doctor's hand immediately goes up and he goes, you thought of way more than I ever could have thought of. And they started clapping. And I'm like, well, thank you. But that's the reason I'm bringing this up is I want you guys to know a lot of these families are doing the things you're telling them. And what you need to do when they come back and say it didn't work, say, good effort. Put that in your toolbox because that's going to work some days, but nothing is going to work every single time. But we want to keep filling your toolbox up and giving you different ideas of how to respond to these things. And you're doing great, mom or dad, right? Because too often we're feeling shamed and blamed in some of these appointments, right? So these strategies are going to help and it will decrease, right? Like, here's the thing, if you got kids with big behaviors, how does a 20% decrease of big behavior sound? Anybody accept that? I'd take that, right? Oh my God, anytime we can decrease the amount of frequency that's happening, it's a win. Okay, a few of these things I'm going to skip. We've got anticipatory stress is a big one too. This was something a family that I worked with, they made a paper chain to count down to the days of something that they were looking for, and each piece of paper had like a quote or a joke on it. But it was actually to plan a grad party. This daughter, her entire senior year was hyper-focused on her grad party starting in September. So every Saturday, the piece of paper had a task for planning the party, right? So just having visual ways of counting down when we have anticipatory stress can be helpful. Being mindful too, a lot of times our kids use the wrong words, especially these words. I used to have arguments all the time with Akila when she said she was starving and she just finished a huge meal. Anybody have those kids, right? All the time. Or she's sitting there and it's like 90 degrees outside and she's saying she's freezing. And I was the ding dong that would argue with her. And then I finally realized when I was consulting with the school and I saw this other kid doing it, and I realized, oh my gosh, those are concrete words that adults try to help solve. When a kid says they're hungry, full, hot, cold, that's a concrete thing that we try to help with. So I realized she's saying those words when she's anxious. And so we have this thing now, what I do with her is when she says one of those words when it doesn't make sense, many times they make sense, right? And I say, wait, are you hot, cold, hungry, full? Let's pause and see what you're feeling, right? And when it doesn't make sense, the majority of the time when we dig into it, it's not that. When she was here in December in Florida, it was a temperature one. We were driving somewhere and she's like, I'm hot. And it was freezing, like the air conditioning was, and then she stopped herself and said, Mom, am I hot, cold, hungry, full? What am I feeling? I'm like, okay, rock star, let's talk, right? That is such a huge win. Again, the more we can teach our kids about these things, about their brains and how they work and how to advocate for themselves, the better. Teaching all of our kids and ourselves about the difference between equal and fair is really important. You shouldn't parent every child in your family with the same strategies. Every child you are caring for is a unique individual human being that has different strengths and weaknesses. And we know that kids are obsessed with fairness and will say things aren't fair all the time. What they're saying is it's not equal. Because this is an equal picture on the left, but it's not fair based on physical differences we can see. On the right, that is not an equal picture, but it is fair and equitable. And we've got to teach our kids. We, as your caregivers, know what you're really good at and where you need extra supports, each one of you. And so things are different for all of you, and that's okay. Again, code words or phrases, I recommend that. My husband and I came up with one, right? Because I would be starting to lose it and getting pulled into a power struggle, and he'd be like, Barb, stop. Or I would do the same to him, and now we feel dumb in front of the kids, right? So our sentence was, I keep forgetting to tell you we're almost out of milk. That meant shut up. Shut the F up and leave. And again, that only works in a two-parent household, single family, single parents, and you don't have that option. But we had the code words with our kids too and stuff. Quit taking it personally if they're calling you names or doing things like that. And nothing's going to work 100% of the time. Give yourself grace. Apologize when you mess up. Find support groups. Prepare to be judged. Find support groups too. And you've got great options with that here with AFFCNY. Did I get it right? Yeah. I have the hardest time with that acronym, you guys. I have the hardest time with that acronym. Visual timers can also be really helpful if you've got kids that have the time blindness, these kind of visual timers. And then these are the QR code again for the handouts if you want those. And then I've got my email here. So my time is up, but I have 2 minutes for questions, I guess, 2 minutes.
Can I take one of those minutes?
Yeah, yeah,
With you?
yeah.
With you?
You gotta come up here on camera though.
Yes, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yep,
Oh, yeah.
there you go.
Go to
Yep.
QR code page.
QR code.
QR code. So first of all, you only, oh, good. Hi, everybody. Hello, Long Island. You definitely didn't get enough of her right now, so you all know that. So I want to make sure every one of you is at the keynote tomorrow, because that's going to be a fabulous keynote. So I want to make sure you all are there, including everybody. Also, you.
And 9 a.m.
And 9 a.m.
Well,
9 a.m. FASD.
Yes,
session
yes,
too.
yes. I'm selling one thing, you'll sell the other half. All right. Now, in regard to that, keep buying your 50/50s, because one of you will go home with a lot of money, but we're not going to do the drawing until after Barbara finishes her keynote. So I just wanted everybody to know that.
You have to be present.
You have to be present, because that's the whole point.
Don't let me speak to an empty room. It's hard to be the closing keynote because everybody leaves, especially on a
And
Friday
it's
afternoon.
a great subject. Do you remember what you call it?
Yeah, I hope I remember.
I know, it's humility.
Humility, humor, and hope. And I'm going to talk about the arrogance we went into our parenting journey with, and share a lot of humorous stories, more than you heard today even, and then end it with hope and how well my kids are doing.
And what better 3 things to hear about? So please,
Yeah.
we all be there.
Yeah. Thanks, Pat.
And keep buying 50/50.
And we will, and Jean and Rebecca and I are doing the FASD session tomorrow morning. I'll be sharing that I actually 3 weeks ago was diagnosed with FASD myself. I have FASD as well. And so we'll be talking about that tomorrow a little bit also. So, and a lot of you guys probably have kids that have FASD that are not diagnosed. And so we'll be talking about that in the morning. So thank you. I can take questions, but you guys can leave. I know the time is up, but I'm happy to stay for a bit and take questions. We'll go here and then there.
I was told it's really hard to diagnose.
FASD diagnostics are very complicated. We'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow morning, but yes, they are complicated. Yep. Yes.
I talk with a lot of parents who say, I'm okay if my kid is raging, lying, or stealing, at, to, or from me. But when they do it to their siblings who have a lower emotional, social, cognitive age,
Yes.
do you have tips for explaining or helping siblings understand each other?
Okay, so the question is, many families are okay with when the kids are raging towards the caregiver, but when it's towards the siblings, that's a very complicated dynamic. And so, so what we need to do, again, I recommend that in our families, we are talking about everybody's brains, including the parents. What are our brains strong at, and what do our brains need extra supports in? Including both, all the caregivers, all the adults who live in the home, and all the kids, to normalize the fact that we all have things that we are strong at and things that we need extra support in. And that when she or he is having these behaviors, it is because of the way their brain was compromised or damaged or injured. And I know it's hard. And so we want to also make sure we try to get the right therapeutic interventions for the siblings that understand sibling dynamics and things like that. I mean, it's a really complicated question that could be another workshop that I'll do next year. No, I'm kidding. But actually, my youngest son and I next week in Minnesota are keynoting together at a conference to talk about that exact topic. So yeah, it's a good question. Yes.
I was wondering, like, how do you, with the developmental ages, like, is there like strategies of helping them age up?
Oh, so developmentally, the strategy to help our kids to developmentally progress is to keep their anxiety low. So the lower we can keep their anxiety, the more they're going to learn and develop. And to kind of meet them where they're at developmentally is what's going to allow that to progress more quickly. Good question. Never had that one before.